Okay, everybody. What are we doing? So this is going to be the lecture two for our breakout game. And so down here, you can see that there's a lecture two here. And what this should cover is adding a new paddle class to our project. And in order to do that, I've got a slide to show you. And also I have a main.java. Now, I think I'm not going to use it the way it is here because it's harder to copy paste for people. So yeah, I don't really know what to do about that. But for now, I'm going to download these lecture slides by clicking that. They're downloading here, and we will go ahead and open those up. And so this is pretty much what we're going to follow. And yeah, let's go ahead and get started. So on the second slide already, it's talking about creating a paddle class. But we can't just create a paddle class. We have to, where are we starting from for this lecture? And so I'm going to open Eclipse, which I have here. And this is where I left our project in the previous part. So I'm going to close this and I'm going to create a new project because you may be doing that too. I don't really know. And so I'll just create a new Java project and I will call it um, I guess I called the other one Breakout Part 1, so I'll call this Breakout Part 2. And after I do that, I need to create our main. So I'm going to go to a new class, and I will create a main for the name, and it doesn't matter what else I put here, and then I'll put finish. Now, what needs to go in here, though, is the code that we finished last time. And so I think my intention is to make that copy pastable from here, like have a text window where we can get that. But for now, I just have this. So I'll have to do this. I'll have to download this file. It's in here. We'll open that up. It's opening up in, a different application here. And I'm just going to select all of this code from main.java and go back to Eclipse and I'll put it here. So hopefully you'll have a better way of getting that file. But that's what we just did. And so if I run this, we'll be where we left off on the previous lecture. So if I run this, you can see we've got our window, I've got our rectangle, and left, right, up and down, move it around, and it can't move off the left side, and it can't move off the right side. But if you saw the last video, you'll know that I didn't fix that for the bottom or the top, so it can move off the top and the bottom for the moment. That doesn't matter because we don't care about this green box. So this is where we're starting. Cool. Now, where did our lecture slides go? Here they are. So what we need to do is to create a new class or paddle. So as we said in the previous lecture, every kind of object in our game, like the bricks and the paddle and the ball, etc., should be in its own class. And so we'll have to create it now. So we're going to right click and do new Java class. We're going to name it paddle and we'll add fields, constructors, methods one by one. And then when we're done adding all that stuff, then we'll need to modify the main to actually put our paddle in our game. And so that's the game plan for this lecture. Now, some stuff we need to keep in mind is because I know that, classes are new to you, is that when we name our class, we've got to name it with a capital. So we're going to name it with a capital P. Okay. So back to Eclipse. Well, that's not Eclipse. Back to Eclipse. What I do here is, I can click on SRC for our project, right click, and we'll do new class, just like you do for the main. And I'll name it paddle. Capital P on paddle. Doesn't matter if we check anything else here. Cool. So you should see, as I have here, that we have main.java and paddle.java in the same project, right? So we have our main and we have our paddle. The paddle's not doing anything right now. Okay. Now let's go back to our slides and see what we're going to be doing. So over here, this is like an empty skeleton, right? It says fields, constructors, getters, setters, methods. So fields, we don't have to, this is just a comment, you don't have to put that in there, but fields, right? That's the data that you think your paddle is going to need. And so there's like recommendations in here. Technically, you wouldn't have to follow this, but this is kind of the minimum of what the paddle that moves left and right at the bottom of the screen is going to need, right? It needs an X and a Y position. It needs a width and a height. It needs a speed. Needs a color. Looks like this slide got messed up when I put it here. That's okay. Um, that's what we're going to need. And so if we just go here and we just say, okay, there's an X, um, there's a Y, there's a width, there's a height. What's next? Speed and color. Int for speed and a color, and we'll call it color. And so this is something pretty typical here, where color is actually a class, and so it has a capital C, and the color in the paddle we'll just use a lowercase c for. So the name of the class has an uppercase C, but the one with the lowercase c is just um, a variable in this particular class. So we can just call it color, and it'll be lowercase, as most of our variables start with lowercase letters. Now, when I did color, you'll notice that over here, we've got a little color cannot be resolved to a type. That's because we have to import the right library in order to have color. And so it's telling me down here that you can click a thing and have it do it right. Um, you can just, we need this AWT here, like that. And as soon as I put that up on the top, you'll see that the problem with the color went away, because the color lives in here somewhere. Cool. So that's all the variables I think I need for now. And once we have our variables, oh, and you can notice some other details here, like the position is going to be integers. So that's like an X and Y coordinate, and it's going to be in pixels. And also the width and the height are also going to be in pixels. So how wide do you want it to be and how tall do you want it to be? All right. And the position is actually going to be the upper left corner up here, which is something to keep in mind. All right, what's next? Constructors. So the constructor runs when you create a new paddle, right? So not right now, but sometime over here in main, like where we have all these variables in main, you're going to write something like this. Paddle, paddle equals new paddle. You're going to write code that looks something like this. And when you do a new paddle, it's going to basically create the paddle and fill in some default values. I'm going to just delete it though for now. Come back over here. So constructor. What's up? So what are constructors, right? So a constructor is a method, and it's a method that has the same name as the name of your class. So if I do like this, paddle, I've created a constructor. And what do you need to do when you create a new paddle? Well, basically, all these things need to get filled in with some kind of default values. So you can just do like this, x equals, well, what do we think the default x value should be? Well, that's actually a little bit tough because like you want it probably to start out in the middle of the screen, but in order to know where that is, you kind of have to know how big the screen is, right? So for right now, I'm just going to write this. I'm going to put 350. Just taking a guess at what x value I want. What y value? I'm going to put in a value that's not a good value here, and we'll change it later. Um, I don't know if that's a good idea, but you'll see why I'm doing this in a minute, I think. So, we'll start it out at 350, comma 200 for the coordinates. Then we need a width and a height. How wide should our paddle be? Don't know. We'll just put in a number for now. How tall should our paddle be? I don't know. I'll just put in a value for now. Okay. Speed. What should the speed be? Well, I also don't know. Maybe 10. And then a color. And the color you can get from the color class where you do color dot and you can pick a color off this list. But there's also other ways you can do it. Like you can see down here that you can do um, get color. You can give it some kind of string, um, or you can just pick one of the default colors here. What does that mean? So like, I think we should be able to do, let's see here, RGB to HSB, RGB floats. I think we need that. Um, decode, decode. I don't think we need that. For now, we'll just pick a color. We'll do cyan. Um, okay. Now, having done that, what that means is when you create a new paddle, it's going to have all of these values here. Now, sometimes that's not what you want. So like, if you remember when we talked about method name overloading, you could say like, well, what if we want to create a paddle in a specific place, right? Like I don't want to start it here. I want to start it at a certain X and Y coordinate. Well, if you want to do that, you'd have to have um, variables coming in for the X and the Y values that you want to use when you create your paddle. That would allow you to create your paddle with a specific X and Y. So like going back over to the main, I said we're going to do something like this. Paddle, sorry, paddle, paddle equals new paddle, right? I said that's what we're going to do, and it is. But like, what if you want to make a paddle in a different place, right? You can see where you might want to do something like this instead. Maybe you want to go like 500 comma 200, right? Like if you had a specific X and Y where you wanted to create the paddle, it'd be convenient to be able to do the second one, right? Where it would put the paddle where you said you want the paddle. But in order for this to work, you would have to write a constructor that takes two integers as the input because, this is two integers as the input. So you can have multiple constructors here that are going to basically do the exact same thing. The only difference is instead of 350 and 200, I should make the X value whatever the input X is, and I should make the Y value whatever the input Y value is, right? And so something like this, oops, uh, something like this would allow you, to create a paddle at the default coordinates or to create a paddle at specific coordinates. And so that you can have multiple constructors. Now, we're not going to be making too many paddles in our game, right? And the paddles are not going to vary too much. So you don't really want to get bogged down into creating these. Um, One thing I would maybe advise is adding some constants up here. And that's just because, like, what if we do have a bunch of these, right? Like the width is 100 and the height is 30, and the width is 100 and the height is 30. And what if I decide later that this should be like 90, right? So I edit it here. So this is 90 now. Well, this one's 90, but I didn't change this one, right? And so you can run into trouble when you're writing your classes in Java if you have like repeated code, because like this is repeat of a lot of this. And, if you change something in one place, you got to remember to go and change it everywhere. And, um, otherwise you'll get bugs because you'll like be like, oh, I set it to 90, but then maybe you call this one where it's still set to 100. And then your game like you run into issues where like, oh, the first time you start your game and the paddle has a width of 100, but then after you die one time, now the paddle has a width of 90, right? It was 100 and now it's 90 just due to a bug because one time you used this function and one time you used this function. So to avoid those issues, you can have constants up here where you can go like final, and then we can say like uh, x, and you can just put in like where you want your starting x value and final int and final int y, and that could be like the 200, and then your final int width, and if you want that 100, you could put 100. So you could add these as constants up here instead of using the numbers down here. What height did we have? 30? I think 30 might be too tall, but it doesn't matter. Final. Why did I uppercase that? Final color, color equals color dot cyan. So it might seem like, we don't like you don't understand why I'm doing this, but what this will allow me to do is that I set these constants once up here, and then down here, I just do like x equals x, y equals y. And notice that the constants have all been named with uppercase letters. Width is width, height is height, speed is speed, and color is color. And the advantage to doing it this way is that now when you have like repeats like this, you don't have to change you don't have to change the width more than once. Like if you decide that you want to change the width of the paddle, you change it up here in the constants rather than looking for every place where you set the width down here and setting it to something else. All right. So anyway, that's going to be good for now for constructors. We probably spent too long on that. Um, After constructors, what do we need? Um, Getters and setters. So every class should have these. Um, if you don't put these in, then you'll have to write them every time you decide you need one of them. And so it's just easier to get started by putting them all in from scratch, or at the beginning, I should say. So like what's a getter and what's a setter? Well, like a setter will set all of these variables to something in particular. So like you can write a method called like uh, void set x, and then an integer that comes in, we need to give it an x value. Now I'm going to show you two ways to do this. I'm going to set that to nx, which is just the name of a variable, and then I'll just say x equals nx. Right? So a setter would do this, and what that would let you do in main is if you had a paddle like this, you would now be able to do paddle dot set x, and you could set the x value to like 3, and that would just set the x value to 3. Um, so cool. Um, Also, should probably be private if we it should be private if we don't want you to use it from main, and it should be public if we do. And also, I guess that's another way we can come up here and say probably actually all of these should also be private. because we don't want them to be accessed outside of here. Now, what's it complaining about? The value paddle X is not used. Well, yeah. Um, so, okay. So what was I doing? I was writing these setters and getters. So, like this is one way to do it, where the variable that's coming in is called like in X, and then you could call it whatever you want. And then the internal variable here is X. But what a lot of people do is they do this. They go, the input variable is X, and also the variable inside of the class is also called X. And you can't do this, right? That doesn't make sense to type X equals X. And so how do you keep track of the difference? Because this X is the one that's being in the function call. So like when you do paddle dot set X and you go 900, right? Like that sets the X value to 900. Um, so that 900 would be this X. But this X is internal to the class. That's a separate variable. And so in order to make this work, what you do is this one here that's coming into the method is called X. That's the one on the right side. And the one internal to the class is also called X, but to refer to it, you can call it this dot X. And so this is another way to do it. So this one is the one coming in. It's the one on the right. And the one in the class is this dot X. And anyway, that's a setter. So that's a setter for the X value. And once you have one of them, you just kind of autopilot do the others, right? So there's a set X, there's a set Y. Um, there should be a set width, right? And these are very fast to write. But I mean, you gotta write them so that they exist. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to set the width. So we do this for most of our variables. You could just not write them. And the first time you realize that you need, you know, set width, you could write set width. But it is nice to start with them. So we can set X, Y, width, and height. There's also speed and color. Speed. And the advantage to using the same variable names in multiple places here is that, you don't have to think very hard. Speed is called speed everywhere. And then we have the color as well, assuming the paddle can change color. So set color. Be careful here. This is the first time it's not an integer now. It's a color, 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 color. All right. So those are all the setters. Guess what? Now we have to write the getters. And so the getters work similarly. Um, And what you would want them for is like, for example, here, you can set the X value to be 900, but what if you wanted to know what the current X value is, right? Then you could do like int, you know, current X is paddle dot get X, like that. And you'd be able to get the value from the paddle. What is it complaining about up here, by the way? Token dot? Do I not have a set X? I'm blind. Why is it complaining about that? Oh, because I didn't save it. I, 'cause I didn't save it. Okay. I'm not going to worry about this right now. Um, but the point is that the way this would work is you would want to um, like have a way to get the value as well as to set the value. And so, um, for example, if the x value is an integer, you would have a public method that returns an integer, so not void now, and it should be called get x to get the x value. And then all it needs to do is return the x value. And that's all it needs to do. And so that would return the x value so that you can get it over here in main. And then you got to do that for every variable. So you go get y, return y. You go get uh, width, return width. Something that's really a really common mistake when you're creating all of these is that you'll copy paste and like you'll change the name but forget to change the variable. So like it'll still say X. And then of course it doesn't work right and you'll have a bug. So what we have? X, Y, width, height, speed. And I guess color is the last one. And you again, you have to remember color has a type called color, and we would return the color. Okay. What duplicate method get X? Ah, yep, didn't change that. Color, color, color. All right, cool. So that's a lot of like writing very similar code, but having these, what it would allow us to do is again, you can create your paddle up here, and then you'd be able to say paddle dot set color, and then you'd be able to say like color dot, you know, green, and then you'd make the color for your paddle green just by doing that. That's the idea. I'm still not going to worry about why we're getting a syntax error there. We'll fix it in a bit. Um, okay, so what do we got? Constants, fields, constructors, getters, and setters. Um, guess methods now. Again, this is just a comment. It doesn't actually do anything. So, you can look here to see how to do it. This is an example of the constructor. We did getters and setters. Did them on one line here, like public int, get x, return x. Um, I mean, we just did all this. Notice that we weren't looking at this, but ours are still identical, except we didn't write them on one line. And then notice that the setters work the same way, like set x, this dot x equals x, set y, this dot y equals y, set speed. They used an S here, speed equals S. It says for a project this size, public fields are fine too. Getters and setters become valuable when you need to validate input for clamping, like set X, so the paddle can't go off the screen. Yeah, you don't have to make these private, but uh, you could, and that's like good, straightforward programming. All right, so we have methods now, and so for the methods, the first method we're going to need is we want to be able to move it to the left and to the right. So you can go public, and I don't think this needs to return anything, so it can be void. And if we want to move it left, you can just call it move left, can be the name of the method. And we don't even need a number in here. We can just say move left, and left is negative in terms of the x direction. So you can go x equals x minus the speed. So like if the speed is 10, then we're going to subtract 10 from the position. That's it. And then you do the same thing for move right. And the only difference is we would add the speed. Now they write it slightly different over here, like minus equals and plus equals, but that's the equivalent, right? So we need to either add or subtract from the x. And we can do more here, but I think the last thing I want to do is I want to draw the rectangle, right? Because we haven't drawn the paddle. It's got all this data, but we haven't drawn it yet. So let's try to do that. So let's scroll down here. I'm going to worry about this later. I'm going to write a draw method. Now this one works fine. So you go public draw, public void draw. And the way you draw the rectangle is exactly the way we drew the rectangle before, which we didn't even look at in the previous lecture. But if you go over to the previous lecture and we scroll down to the section where I said is where we draw everything, this is how you draw a rectangle. So you set the color and then you do a fill rect. So like if you copy this code and you come over here and we put it here, this isn't quite right because first of all, we don't want to set the color to be green, right? We want to set the color to be whatever the color is, right? We have this internal field containing the color. So set the color to the color, and then the rectangle should be drawn at the x coordinate, the y coordinate, and the width and the height. Now you might notice there's some errors here, and the errors are our window's called G, but there's no G here, right? G is over in the main. So what you have to do is we have to give it the window to draw in. So you go graphics, G. There you go. So when you draw the paddle, it will draw the paddle with the correct color in the correct position with the correct width and the correct height. All right, let's see if we can make it work. So let's come back over here. Our main method, we have a paddle. Let's make the paddle public. It doesn't matter, but let's make the paddle public. Cool. Let's try to run our program. Run. Okay, this is how we left it, right? So the code that we wrote for paddle, like I was being careful not to make any mistakes, right? I've got no red over here, but the paddle doesn't do anything yet. So to create a paddle, we need to declare one. So public paddle, paddle's the class. The name is paddle. You can call it like paddle one, or you can call it my paddle, or you can call it game paddle, like if that helps you keep it separate. But I'll just call it paddle, lowercase, and it needs to be a new paddle. Boom. Now, again, we already had that. So when you run it, look, there's no paddle. So how do we make it so the paddle ends up on the screen? Well, you got to go down to here, right? Draw everything in here. Paint component. Right now it's drawing this green rectangle, but we wanted to draw the paddle. And so how do you draw the paddle? You write paddle dot draw. And you got to put the G in there, which it did automatically, but that's how you do it. So now when we run our program, we magically should have a paddle. There it is. There's the paddle. Now we can move this rectangle, but we can't move this paddle. So first of all, the paddle's up here. It should be down here somewhere, right? And so if we want to adjust the position, we should go back over here. And this Y position was for where the paddle's being drawn. So right now it's at 200. So you go, okay, that's too high. So what's 300? Okay, that's lower. I want it down here though. 400. Well, it's still too high. 500. That looks good, right? I think that's good. Maybe a little lower actually, even 540. I don't know, right? You put it wherever you want. Okay, so down there, that's too low. 20. Okay, we'll stick with this. So also I think it's I think it's not wide enough. I want it wider. So we'll change the width up to 120, maybe. 140? That seems good. I feel like that's good. Now at that point, it's it's 140 wide, so it's not quite in the center. If you look, like the center is probably right around here, so it needs to move over a little bit to the left. That's because the width was 800, but this is at 350, which is 50 less than the middle. But I think we would need 70 less than the middle because this is 140 now. So like I think that would have to be 330 to get it in the middle. But if it's not in the middle, it doesn't really matter. So anyway, so we have a paddle. Cool. Great. Again, we can't move it yet, right? So we now have a paddle on the screen. So coming back over here, that draws our paddle. Where do we move the paddle? Well, if you look over here, currently there's this action performed, and it says if left, rect x minus equals speed, if right, rect x plus equals speed, up, rect y, right? But we don't want this. We want to move our paddle, right? So instead of this stuff, I'm gonna comment it out, but we're really gonna delete this. I just don't want to delete it yet. And I am gonna delete this. So what we actually want is this, if left, and that's a Boolean. So like when left is true, that means you're pressing left. Um, you could, like, for example, you can change the names, the variables. Where are the variables? Oh, up, down, left, right. Like you can, that's like the up key being pressed. So like you can call it like up pressed, down pressed if you want. But for now, they're up, down, left, right, and they're Boolean. So they're true or false. So if left is being pressed, what do you want to do? Well, we should take our paddle and move it left, right? That's all we got to do. These were one line, but like, we normally write our code like that, right? So if left, move it left. If right, move it right. And just this code right here, that should make our paddle work. Run. Moves left and right now. But look, it goes off the screen and it goes off the screen. So we got to do something about that. And there's different ways you could do it. Go here. One way is when you're moving it, right? When we do move left and move right, you want to not move outside of the screen. So one way to do that is to add a new method, maybe called move or called public, uh, you know, fix paddle. I'll call it fix paddle, and it'll be void. Doesn't need to return anything. Public fix paddle. And what does that do? If the x value is negative, right? We don't want it to go negative, right? So if the x value is negative, then we'll set it back to 0. And up here, whenever you move the paddle now, we can just call fix paddle. And now when we run it, look, can't go off the screen. It can still go off the screen the other way though. So we got to fix that. So we'll add a fix paddle down here to the move right as well. And also, if the x value is negative, set it to 0. But also, if the x value is how big? Well, the width of the screen is 800, right? So it'd be 800, but then we have to minus the width of the rectangle of the paddle. And you'd have to set the x value to 800 minus the width of the paddle, like that. And so this little method here will just make it so the paddle cannot leave the screen. not to the left, not to the right. So just like that, we have a paddle that works. Left and right arrow keys work, and A and D work up here. Now you can't move it up and down though, right? And that's intentional because in this game, you can't move the paddle up and down. So there's no move up and there's no move down. And over here, we're not going to actually use the up and the down keys. I mean, you can keep that code there if you want, but we're not going to use them. So we now have a paddle that moves around on the screen. What's left? Probably nothing. That was probably a long lecture already. And we drew it and we created a new paddle. And if left pressed, again, we didn't call them left pressed because we used that AI code from last time. So that was just called left. If left, paddle move left. If right, paddle move right. And then when we draw it, paddle dot draw. And hopefully you can see what's going to happen, right? Because we're going to write like a ball class that bounces around and stuff. And we're going to have to write a brick class and so on. But they're all going to have a lot of the same stuff, right? The bricks don't need to move, so they don't have a speed, but a brick has an X, a Y, a width, a height, and a color, right? The ball has an X, a Y, a width, a height, a speed, and a color. So like the ball and a brick are going to be almost the same thing. The only difference between like a ball and a paddle is that when you go to draw it, you're not going to be drawing a rectangle, you're going to draw a circle. That's about the only difference. So that code will go much faster than this, where we were kind of inventing everything from scratch. Now, you might see some other weaknesses of the code that we wrote here, like this is kind of dependent on how wide our screen is, but we have it hard coded. And also down here, the 800 is dependent on how wide our screen is, and we have it hard coded. So if you wanted to make the game window a different size, you got to edit these. Maybe you should have separate variables for the screen width and screen height and make it all dynamic. You could do that, but we're just gonna leave it like this. Um, what else? Yeah. So once we have a ball, how are we going to add the ball? You would just do public ball ball equal new ball, right? It's going to be very similar code once we have the ball. And once we do have a ball, and you go down here to where it's drawn, where's drawn? Oh, here. No, here, right? You're just going to do paddle.draw to draw the paddle. Ball.draw is going to draw the ball. We're going to have a grid of bricks that I'm going to call brick grid. And that's going to have a dot draw as well. And so, like what we did for the paddle, we're going to be doing for everything. But not yet because we haven't written it. So I don't know. We got pretty far, right? We got a paddle that moves around. So we'll go ahead and stop this lecture here. And hopefully this is useful to somebody. Let us stop this.